Yet, we'll never really fully understand the processes involved in these supervolcanic eruptions until one of them happens.
74,000 years ago, a supervolcano erupted here in Sumatra. The resultant caldera formed Lake Toba, 100 kilometers long, 60 kilometers wide. It was, in short, colossal. Scientists are only now beginning to understand the effects of so much ash on the planet's climate. This is the Ocean Core Repository at Columbia University in America. It contains thousands of drill samples from seabeds around the world, a historical keyhole through which scientists like Michael Rampino can view volcanic history.
The size of the Toba eruption was enormous. We're talking about 3,000 cubic kilometers of material coming out of that volcano. That's about 10,000 times the size of the 1980 Mount St. Helens eruption, which people think of as a large eruption, a truly super eruption. This is an ocean drilling core from the central Indian Ocean. It's about 2,500 kilometers from the Toba volcano. And here are 35 centimeters of ash deposited after the Toba eruption. It shows that this Toba eruption was a supervolcanic event. It was much, much bigger than any other volcanic eruption we see in the geological record. Chemical analysis of the ash tells us that this eruption was rich in sulfur, would have released a tremendous amount of sulfur dioxide and other gases into the stratosphere, which would have turned into sulfuric acid aerosols and affected the climate of the Earth for years.
For a long time, scientists have known that volcanic ash can affect the global climate. The fine ash and sulfur dioxide blasted into the stratosphere reflects solar radiation back into space and stops sunlight reaching the planet. This has a cooling effect on the Earth. In the year following the 1991 eruption of Mount Pinatubo, for instance, the average global temperature fell by 0.5 degrees Celsius. By comparing the amount of ash ejected by past volcanoes with their effect on the Earth's temperature, Rampino has estimated the impact of the Toba eruption on the global climate 74,000 years ago.
I'm plotting a simple graph where on one side there's sulfur released in millions of tons by volcanic eruptions, and on the other side there's the cooling in degrees Celsius that we saw after these volcanic eruptions. I'm plotting as points the historical eruptions like Mount St. Helens, Krakatoa, Pinatubo, Tambora. There's a nice correlation between the sulfur released into the atmosphere and the cooling.
Because of this relationship between the sulfur released by large volcanoes and global cooling, Rampino can calculate the drop in temperature caused by the Toba eruption.
And we can see this kind of plot predicts that the Toba eruption was so large that the temperature change after Toba in degrees Celsius would have been about a 5-degree global temperature drop. Very significant, very severe global cooling.
A 5 degrees Celsius average drop in global temperature would have been devastating, causing Europe's summers to freeze and triggering a volcanic winter.
Five degrees globally would translate into 15 degrees or so of summer cooling in the temperate to high latitudes. The effects on agriculture, on the growth of plants, on life in the oceans would be catastrophic.
This global catastrophe would have continued for years, dramatically affecting life on Earth. But what impact did it have on humans? The answer may be buried not inside the ancient rocks, but deep within us all. Lynn Geordie and Henry Harpending are scientists specializing in human genetics. Since the early 1990s, they have been studying mitochondrial DNA, using the information to investigate mankind's past. Most of our genetic information is stored in the nuclei of our cells, but a small separate quantity exists in another component, the part which produces the cell's energy, the mitochondria.
Mitochondria have their own genes. It's a small number of genes, a small amount of DNA, but it's distinct from the rest of the DNA in the cell. And because of the way mitochondria are transmitted from one generation to the next, they're inherited only from the mother. So they give us a record of the maternal lineage of a population.
Mitochondrial DNA is inherited only through the mother. All mutations are passed on from mother to child, generation after generation at a regular rate. Over time, the number of these mutations accumulate in a population.
Every event that takes place in our past, every major event, a population increase, a population decrease, or the exchange of people from one population to another, changes the composition of the mitochondrial DNA in that population. So what happens is that we have a record of our past written in our mitochondrial genes.
By knowing the rate of mutation of mitochondrial DNA, and by a complex analysis of the distribution of these mutations, the geneticists can estimate the size of populations in the past. Several years ago, they began seeing a strange pattern in their results.
We expected that we would see a pattern consistent with a relatively constant population size. Instead, we saw something that departed dramatically from that expectation. We saw a pattern much more consistent with a dramatic reduction in population size at some point in our past.
This confirmed what other geneticists have noticed. Given the length of time humans have existed, there should be a wide range of genetic variation. Yet DNA from people throughout the world is surprisingly similar. What could have caused this? The answer is a dramatic reduction of the population sometime in the past. A bottleneck.
If we imagine the population diagrammed like this, in the distant past, back here, we had a large population, then a bottleneck looking like this, and then a subsequent enlargement of population size again. So we would have families of people in the distant past with a significant amount of genetic diversity. But when the bottleneck occurs, when there's a reduction in population size, perhaps only a few of those families would survive the bottleneck. We have a dramatic reduction in genetic diversity during this time when the population is very small. And then after the bottleneck, the people who we would see today would be descendants only of those who survived. So they're going to be genetically much more similar to one another, reducing the amount of genetic variation.
It seems so incredible. You know, the idea that all of us, you know, there's 6 billion people on Earth, and what the data were telling us was that our species was reduced to, a few thousand. Suddenly,